Friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 334 of the Health Detective Podcast. And we're speaking with Marley Jones today all about brain health, and we're going to touch on her personal story as well in the beginning. Appreciate you guys who tuned in with us yesterday. That was the busiest we had it in a little bit, so very exciting. And this is the second podcast since we took off last week for Holistic Health Week. Now, none of you guys told me. You just sat there in the comments yesterday. No one said anything. So I'm curious if you were on our Holistic Health Week. Did you like it? Let us know. We got some amazing feedback from it. We even though we didn't talk really about the FDN course in it, we got some people who signed up for the course. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, let me know if you attended that and if you liked it. All right, we will jump into the guest's bio, and then we have plenty to talk about today. So, specializing in functional health with a focus on the brain and central nervous system, Marley Jones is a doctor of naturopathy with 20 years of professional experience and a lifetime of personal holistic healing. Globally, she hosts the Healing Chronic Illness with Marley podcast and builds better brains through the Brain Training Tribe online program. She is honored to be an instructor and representative for Zengar, Zengar's NeuroOptimal brain training systems. Marley's mission is clear: to relieve suffering and empower people to be flexible and resilient to life's stressors. She is a proud Canadian American, and when she is not hiking or horseback riding in the Rocky Mountains, it's awesome, she is at the beach or alligator hunting at her home in Florida. Well, you are full of surprises, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Ev. I'm really appreciative.
We'll schedule you for round two to talk about that alligator hunting thing.
Oh,
I'd love
sure.
to know how that goes. But today we'll keep it, just simple and boring. We'll start with the normal question that we always begin with. And that is, what did your personal health symptoms look like and when did they begin?
Yeah, you'd mentioned that I didn't have a ton of time, so I don't want to bore anybody. But, I started having health issues back in the fourth grade, or grade 4 in Canada, as we say it. And it came probably prior to that, after I've spent some time talking to my mom. As an infant, I had been hospitalized in the ICU with some issues with the underlying infection. But, things got really bad for me. I grew up in a very moldy house, toxic mold in the basement. I had it tested years later, and the horrible fungal infection that I had was a very rare form of a mucor strain, and it was a complete match in my parents' basement. So I struggled a lot growing up, and then I had a head injury in the 9th grade, which at that time they didn't know what to do with that, and I didn't know who to talk to. They didn't really believe in counseling, at least in my family. That was not an issue. So you just had to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. And so I learned to cope, but I had a really hard time. So I had developed an anxiety disorder following that head injury in junior high. And then it kind of plagued me off and on in through college. And then the straw that broke the camel's back for me was when I was horseback riding in Oklahoma on our little ranch there. I got a lot of tick bites, and I had the bullseye rashes, and 2 weeks, so I pulled them off of me and was like, well, is there anything stuck in there? There wasn't, but I had welts. And then 2 weeks later, I woke up one morning and I couldn't bend my right index finger. And then I noticed that a couple of days later, I couldn't bend another joint and another joint. And so I went to my physician, and he said, you need to go to a rheumatologist. And then I went to the rheumatologist. And mind you, through all this time, I was terrified because my mom has RA and I watched her suffer. So when I went to the rheumatologist, looking back, I would do it all different because he was the expert and I was 22 at the time. And he said, there's no reported cases of Lyme disease in the state of Oklahoma. And so I was left untreated. Instead, they gave me a lupus diagnosis. And so sent me home with a whole bunch of medications. And I did that for a little while. I tried to go to a support group. I was never more anxious and depressed in my entire life than going to the lupus support group that I went to. And so all of that was just ensuing more anxiety, more symptoms were coming up. And so I just kind of jumped ship. and went to a naturopath. And I thought, I don't want to be like my mom. My mom's great. She's a strong woman, and she's been through the ringer with her health issues. And so I was always very scared that that would be me. So I went radical, and I went from, completely changing my diet to juicing and enemas and raw foods and lots and lots and lots of supplements. And then I went back to school. That's when I went back to school, because I not only didn't want to become my mom, I didn't want my kids to ever get what I got. And at the time I wasn't having kids, but somewhere in the midst of tick bites and the rheumatologist, I did get pregnant. And when I went to the rheumatologist on one of my visits in there, I think I was about 6 weeks along, as I was leaving his office, he says, whatever you do, don't get pregnant. And I was 6 weeks along, and I never told him. And I was absolutely devastated, because he told me in my future I'd probably be in a wheelchair by the time I was 30, because he was looking at my markers. Mind you, my blood work did not look good, and I did not feel well. So I left that office and I called my OB-GYN, and I was in hysterics. And he was such an amazing man. He's gone on to heaven now, but he just was who I needed. He said, listen to your great physician. So I needed that perspective in my life at the time. And so I put that thing aside, and, they said not to get pregnant because my antibodies were so severe. They said that if the fetus would even be alive upon delivery, they would need a pacemaker. So they painted all of these horrible things for me. But fast forward, I have a 23-year-old powerhouse son who he was a college athlete, won a national championship. He's healthy. He runs his own business. And my other son, he just rolled in from the University of Florida last night, and he's working in the aerospace program. Both my kids are exceptional athletes, and they're in great health, and they're good humans. And thank God that I was pregnant at the time, because I probably would have listened to my doctor. And being a mom and having that opportunity to live for someone bigger than myself through my hard days where I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm talking for 2 decades, because when you have Lyme, if your finances can survive, if your marriage can survive, if you can survive, you have to persevere and you have to stay in it. And there were some dark times throughout all of that for me. And I'm so thankful that I had my kids as a distraction, if anything.
Right. Oh man, you weren't kidding when you said we had plenty to unpack there. I got to ask some questions about it. So one, I want to emphasize the importance of, because there are Western practitioners that listen to this, and they're probably more open than those that wouldn't listen to something like this. But my point in saying that or bringing that up is, look at how powerful some of the statements from these influential figures, right? These authority figures, right? They're doctors.
Yeah.
They are authority figures in a sense.
Right.
Look at how powerful just the statements were, right? There's never been a case of Lyme in Oklahoma, which, maybe there wasn't a reported case. It's not that I'm saying that that's untrue, but I think we need to be, as health professionals in general, so much more careful with our words and just being more curious and open to the experience of the client or patient. And I think that's something that FDNs and many health coaches actually, and natural medicine doctors are very good at, because usually you get into this line of work primarily because you had a health issue. And I'm not saying that traditional doctors don't do that, but I will say, I think the health story that led to this career is way overrepresented in the natural medicine space compared to the Western medicine. A lot of people for Western medicine, that is a symbol of intelligence, diligence, hard work, and status, as opposed to just doing it because you had health issues. Not always the case, but often that is the case. And when these statements are made by anyone, it has an effect on us psychologically. When it's made by someone that we're trusting for our health, it's powerful. And in both cases, it was wrong for you. That's the worst part. So I don't want to promote anyone being overly skeptical, but I do want to promote all of us to be a little overly curious, right? Is that actually right? Is this one statement from this one person correct? And I mean, you were in your early 20s at the time. I don't know how much you knew about this stuff. So that's very That's tough. I think this will lead into the bigger conversation. So I'm going to ask this, even though it's within the story too. You mentioned that you were fed up. You didn't want to do what, or end up like your mom, and you wanted to pursue a nature path. But one thing I always wonder is, and it's my favorite question, one of them, is how did you even make that decision? Because there's plenty of people, like if I went and talked to 100 people today on the street and said, what does a doctor of natural medicine do? A lot of them don't even know that that's a real thing. They say, oh, is that a real doctor, whatever.
Mhm.
And I don't want to stereotype, but I'm thinking like Oklahoma, I don't feel like that would have been as prevalent there as, California, for
Mhm.
example. So how did you even know that that existed to go make that choice to rebel against the system and say, I'm going to go to natural medicine?
Well, I actually can attribute that to my late father because he was a horticulturalist and he spent a lot of time in the outdoors. And when he would get ill, he would pull out his Native American herb manual and then he would either go to the hills and pick the herb and make a tincture, or he'd go to the health food store.
Well,
And then I had a mom who was a registered nurse and she did the allopathic route. So I was kind of raised with both. And my mom had all the health issues and my dad was doing great. So I think that's where it probably started for me. But also, I left with all the medications and they did not make me feel better. Now, when down the road, when I finally was able to connect with the phenomenal, like he's the man who got me out of bed, and his name was Jacob Teitelbaum. He is actually since retired, but he's well known. He's been on Dr. Oz and he's on a lot of Reddit, and he's written From Fatigue to Fantastic, and he's kind of this chronic fatigue fibromyalgia guru. But he helped actually on the earlier stages. Like, so in 2013, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia too, because everything just kind of, and then the chronic fatigue element following a really bad season of chronic pneumonia, because my immune system was completely flatlined. And my kids were small, so every time they came home from school, I had something new to deal with. But he found medications, and so he was very integrative and had some things that he offered that supported my adrenals and supported my sleep, and sleep was number one. And so I went through his Shine protocol and he got me to a place where I was out of bed and I was functioning better, but I wasn't quite where I needed to be. So I did use not a lot of medications, but I did take medications, and I was a purist being a naturopath because I thought, well, if I ever get a headache, I don't reach for Tylenol. I go do an enema and make sure I'm hydrated and take my trace minerals. But I had gotten to the point where my next door neighbor, who'd had open heart surgery and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, she went and did all these plastic surgery measures and was living her best life. And I thought, this lady is doing everything to her body that I don't believe in, and she's living a better life than me. And it occurred to me, I'd rather have a false sense of feeling good than a real sense of feeling bad. And so I went ahead and I started taking some of the medications that Dr. T had recommended. And they actually were okay for me. They supported me into a place where, and there were things like low dose naltrexone and low dose hydrocortisone to help support the adrenals, and different things to just help kind of get you out of that state, which leads me to, if I had known about brain health more way back when, but it's all part of your story and all your progression. So fast forward to learning about brain health, and that it wasn't too late for me to do things like hyperbaric and neurofeedback and brain training. Those are the kind of things that if I had known way back then, I very likely could have avoided the medication, but I was grateful that it was there. So my false sense of feeling good helped me elevate in just a life level, because when you don't have any life at all because you're ill, it's okay. Even the naturopath that I studied under, I remember he was such a purist. And when I found out that he actually had to take medications for a little while to like calm his brain chemistry, it set me free, because I think we can be in that natural wellness space. And the problem with some of that is, and that's part of that survival brain that kicks in, we don't want to fudge on anything. And then the problem is we become so hyper vigilant of, oh, I had gluten, I'm just going to, oh, that's horrible. But really, we need to have balance, and we need to not fear the stressor. And so calming that stress response by helping the brain makes us resilient and makes us be able to handle if we've had an exposure or whatever, instead of completely derailing us and allowing our bodies to have enough strength and fortitude and see it through a lens of, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, even if I have to take medications for a little while, just to give yourself grace, because I have met a lot of good faith-filled people that are an absolute hot mess that probably need a little help. And it's okay.
Yeah. I love this objective approach, and I forget who it was months ago, but I had this kind of a similar conversation with someone on the show, because it's really how we're using these things. What the issue is when we give someone with anxiety a freaking benzodiazepine and there is no solution. I know people from high school. I'm 28 now, almost 29. They've been on Xanax since they were 15. Well, not only should you not do that, in my opinion, right? It's not medical advice, but not my opinion.
Sure.
Western medicine doesn't recommend
Yeah,
that.
they
That's
don't
actually
even
not how
recommend
that was supposed to be used.
No, not at all.
And so for me, because I know that's more of an extreme drug than something like LDN, but guess what? Okay, you don't know this about me. I had a phobic level fear of flying for 13 years. And it got to the point where, as I was becoming a young man and getting into my careers, I was losing out on a lot of my speaking career or something with FDN. Actually, FDN kind of came after the speaking stuff, but because I was not willing to get on a plane. So, and I tell this all the time, I went to a doctor. I got prescribed alprazolam, Xanax, low dose for those flights. I got going in the beginning, and now I have flown, if you count individual flights, over 100 since then. I'll have my private pilot's license by the end of this year, and I couldn't even get my PPL if I was still actively taking Xanax. They don't allow that. You're not allowed to have those prescriptions, in addition to many others. So it's Western medicine, I think, was always intended to be this temporary thing or used in extreme situations of an accident or whatever it might be. And as long as we know that, then guess what? You have worse stressors than an Advil all the time. You don't take Advil 5 times a day every day for years. That's really stupid. But there's ways to use this. So I appreciate that perspective. And kind of shifting this then to the brain health side of stuff. Obviously, you got your doctorate in natural medicine, which is amazing. And eventually, during this career, you've adopted this brain health side of everything, which I'm sure was indirectly talked about in natural medicine school. But it seems like it's a very specific focus for you now. So when did that become something that is a major passion for you in what you do and talk about?
Well, because I wish that I had known 25 years ago to start with the brain and creating an opportunity for it to balance and to regulate in the central nervous system, then all the other things that I had spent money on and time on, because so I got Lyme in 99, and it wasn't until about 2019 that I wasn't on the couch almost every day. That's a long time. That's 2 decades of being on the couch or in bed. Ask my kids. That's a long time that mom's always on the couch. So, and it was because I started to do a deep dive into brain health and thought, so I did a SPECT scan. It confirmed what I'd always thought. I had issues with my basal ganglia. I had limited blood flow. I had an inability to, I would take GABA and it would help because I got into some targeted amino acid therapies for a while. And I still work with practitioner accounts that offer those. Nice. But to me, if your central processing unit, which is your brain, does not work right, none of the software, none of the supplements, none of the anything is really, really going to work right. So, and I want to go back to what you said, Ev, about having to take a Xanax before flying and to see where you are now. There's something to be said about those medications. And Xanax is a mast cell stabilizer. And when you unpack those conditions with autonomic nervous system dysfunction, which I work with a lot of people with Lyme and mold illness and multiple chemical sensitivity and all those invisible illnesses that are really, really tricky. And I think a lot of people, and even people, I had a lady come in yesterday with ADHD, and she's had it her whole life. She's 72, but she wasn't diagnosed till she was 60. So she's had all of those extra stressors. In her case, it was trying to focus on work and being able to engage people and understand social cues and being able to focus and always feeling like the odd duck out. And when you feel that way, even though you have a physical reason for it, because if it's a brain issue, because your brain and your mind are not the same. You can't get your mind thinking positive thoughts, and you can't have renewed thinking and a peak performance mindset if your brain doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So if you can give yourself an opportunity, like to handle an airplane ride by calming the nervous system a little bit, and because it's a central nervous system depressant, but then you have a good experience during that flight, that lays down a pathway of, I'm not fearful on this flight. I'm doing pretty good. And then you can do it again, and you can do it again, and you can build on it. And you titrate, you don't need the medications, because you've created new neural pathways, and you've been able to interrupt that consistent, persistent electrical signaling in the brain that really doesn't serve you, because your brain is made to allow you to survive. And so, if you're in an exposure type situation, whether it's a trauma, and trauma to me is on a spectrum, or it's chemical exposure, or you've got some pathogens and biotoxins that are present in the body, that kicks us into survival mode, fight or flight, freeze, fawn, flop, whatever you want to call it. It affects our nervous system. So if you can calm and regulate, and this is what I tell people, you have to have grit and you have to have grace. So I don't push medications on anybody. I don't necessarily, I sell a lot of supplements, and I think it's important because we don't eat out of grandma's garden anymore. But we can do our best, right? But to not be stuck in that hypervigilant state, and to be able to thank your brain and say, oh, okay, I feel a little stressed out right now. What's the signal? Why is that? And say, thank you for trying to protect me right now. But I got this. I can do this. And then the more that we can do that, and the more that we can kind of waltz the waltz with our brain and see that it's out for our best interest, but that we can still take control. You don't have to think every stupid thought that comes along. In fact, you shouldn't. Yep. You should ask yourself, is this true? Is it absolutely true? If it's not, then what's the opposite of that? And then believe that. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you start, having the cells fire together, wire together, where things like airplanes don't concern you anymore, or someone wearing too much Axe body spray, you don't respond the same way when you finally get out of that mode and you feel safe. And so I think brain health is absolutely key. And this is what I wish I could tell my younger self: before you spend money on anything else, train the brain, get it to recalibrate, get it back online, get your autonomic nervous system functioning properly again, because we cannot avoid stress, but we can get good at it.
Okay. Well, one, thank you for, saying it's valid, what I experienced with that, because I agree, it's cool. Like, what happened is, the first time I was just happy to be alive on the dang plane. Like, we landed. I don't even care where I'm at. I'm just like, I'm on the ground again. And then what it transformed into is like, wow, look at the opportunities. Especially for me, like I met Reed and found FDN in San Diego, and I drove there. This was when I didn't fly. So I drove there with my best friend. It was 40 something hours to this, other side of the country, which on one sense, it's amazing that we can even do that. If you had to walk that back in the day, that was a heck of a trek, and now you could drive. So that's cool. But when I'm like, oh my gosh, for a few $100s in economy, I can go there in 5.5 hours, and I can watch a dang video or read a book while I'm doing it. it's unbelievable. So as it started to open up these possibilities to these traveling experiences, it's like, yeah, my brain literally started to learn, no, when we do this, we do fun stuff. Like it's exciting. We get to go either do a job that we love or see a new thing. And then I left the country for the first time last year. The first place I left the country with in a plane, this is awesome, is Italy. And so I didn't realize how spoiled I was, because I'm like, oh my gosh, is the rest of the world just like this? And they're like, no, Italy's pretty dang cool. But yeah, so thank you for that. Now, when it comes to, you've used the words like training the brain, and I've heard these terms before, but for those that might be brand new to this or clicking today saying like, hey, how do I actually get my brain healthy? What does it mean to train one's brain? Because we're not talking about going and doing those repetitive games necessarily online. There's different types of training that we can do. So let's dive into that if we can, please.
Well, so I'll give you a little background for me. So when I learned that, through neuroplasticity, our brains are able to change. So we can build gray matter, we can build white matter, and we can help form new neurons. And we are all the time. We never should ever stop learning. Your brain is like a muscle. It can atrophy. Like, it doesn't actually shrivel up, but actually it does. When they've looked at, there's a study called the Nun study, which is very interesting. And it shows that if you continue to pursue things like higher education and continue to learn, and then of course, I think it's also important to do things that create and spark creativity. We do that a lot when we're kids, and we've gone from like the divergent creative process to the convergent process part of our brain, where we're always following the rules. And I encourage people to do things that would train their brain. For example, get an adult coloring book. Color with your non-dominant hand, and take a different route home from work, or put your pants on the opposite leg. All of those things, because we get into these ruts and we get into these patterns, and patterns is what our brain looks for, because what's our brain trying to do? Keep us safe. Yep. Your brain's always trying to move away from discomfort. So the different programs that I had done the dynamic neuro retraining system, and a lady out of Canada developed it. I'm Canadian. I say all great things come from Canada, and I'll reference that again in a moment. And I know Rita is also from there.
Yes.
And I had looked at the Gupta method. I've read a lot of Joe Dispenza's work about, how does all this work? How do I retrain my brain? Well, my problem is that I was so dysregulated that after my SPECT scan, I thought, okay, now what? So the neuropsychiatrist that ordered it for me said, I need you to do 80 dives in the hyperbaric chamber. And if you do the math on that, that's a lot. And I'm not talking about a soft shell mild HBOT. I was like 2.2 to 2.4 ATAs, because I had Lyme disease. I wanted to be able to help that. But at the same time, when I tried to do things like DNRS or the dynamic neuro retraining system, they want you to be able to rewire your neural pathways with happy brain chemicals. Some things that evoke oxytocin and the endorphins and the feel-good things and a nice dopamine, all of those things that we want, because that elevates us and it makes us happy. Well, my problem was, when I tried to do some of those brain training systems that I had, is I couldn't access a positive childhood memory, which was horrible. I remembered all the crap, but I couldn't. And so I would even listen to other people's YouTube stories that were doing that same program as me. And I couldn't even imagine it. And then I'd even gone to my friend who was my physician at the time. And she said, we just need to meditate. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm scared to be in my own thoughts. My own thoughts scare me. They were dark. They were horrible. I'd spent 20 years being sick and longer. And so my brain was a hot mess, and I couldn't journal because it scared me, because I didn't want to talk about anything negative. So everything just circled for me all the time. I was on that hamster wheel constantly, and burning a ton of energy. And so Fast forward, well, and another reason I had trouble with DNRS is they require you to stand up for long periods of time and do certain rounds, and you want to not talk about your symptoms, which I agree. I think that we can become symptom scanners and our survival brain becomes hypervigilant. And so you notice things wrong in your body. Whereas the average person, they have a headache and they still go for a jog. But when you're stuck in these hypervigilant states and you have the autonomic nervous system dysfunction, it trips the hypothalamus and it's your breaker box in your brain. Everything kind of goes offline. And that's what was going on with me, which triggered the chronic fatigue and the fibromyalgia and all of those other things and kept me in a state of anxiety and depression. So I had POTS as well. So I couldn't stand up and I had really bad AFib. So all of this stuff started to develop and get worse because I was in early menopause, perimenopause. I'm 50 now. So this was 10 years ago, all of this started. So those type of brain training things were really difficult for me. And years ago, before I had moved to Florida, I was going to a psychiatric nurse for some neurofeedback. And I had ran quite a few sessions with her. She was in training me at the time to probably stay in a more of a lower alpha state because I was stuck in fight or flight, right? And I think it helped relax me, but I also felt more tired and I was already had chronic fatigue. So that was an issue for me. So anyway, fast forward, I did a bunch of dives. About 40 sessions into my hyperbaric, the light bulb came on in my head and I actually started to remember some of my positive childhood memories, and it was transformative to me. Then those things could make sense. But then what do you do with it? So when I'm in my neurofeedback clinic, I talk to people about, when your brain gets dysregulated and out of balance, it's like someone went into the file cabinet where it's kept the history of your life and has not only looked like somebody ransacked it, but the lights are off and there's no way to turn the light on. There's no way to sort the papers and the files. And that's kind of how you are. So I learned about the brain training system, NeuroOptimal. It's a different type of neurofeedback than anything I had seen before. It was different than the one that I had tried. It didn't require a diagnosis. It didn't require a protocol, which was a beautiful thing because my good friend from college, she had to be with her son who had severe social anxiety disorder. And by the time he was graduating from high school, she had quit her job. She was a social worker. And she was his PA. And she sat with him in class, and he was 18 years old, graduating from high school. And she goes, she talked to her husband. She's like, I can't follow him to college. We got to do something. So they went to their local neurofeedback clinic and they ran 40 sessions, and awesome. He started to get with friends and he could socially interact a little bit. But the problem was then he started to lose motivation in areas. So then their answer was, let's run another 40 session protocol. And these protocols, when you're running 40 sessions, they're around $5,000. And so I see the value in that type of neurofeedback, but as a naturopath, it doesn't line up with my belief system. One, I don't want another person trying to hit targets and then train me to stay in a certain state. That's what an SSRI does.
Yeah.
And when I found NeuroOptimal neurofeedback, it allows you to go from the 0 or 0.1 infohertz to 64 and back to whatever you need to be that makes sense to be in the present moment. So if you need to be outrunning a grizzly bear, I grew up in Canada, that's a legit thing. You can, and then when the threat is over, your nervous system downregulates. You're not stuck in that trauma loop. So a lot of people that have chronic stress or chronic neuroinflammation, they're stuck and they have ruminating thoughts, or they have these behavioral patterns. And, people that struggle in these areas, to me, whether you take alcohol or medication or you have a different addiction, I don't think it's a moral failure. I just don't. I think it is a brain issue. So if we can get the brain online and working properly so that it's always in the present moment, and that's what the brain software does with NeuroOptimal, it brings you back to the present moment. So the way God created us to live in a state of homeostasis is to enjoy the present. It's a gift, right? To be in the here and in the right now. But we get into these different patterns that don't serve us. And so what the software does is it detects what's happening in the brain and it's giving information back. And it's pretty sophisticated because it happens at 256 times a second. And you're like, wait, what? And that's only because that's as fast as Microsoft can process it. But it's absolutely been transformative for me. And so I bought a system without ever trying it, because for 2 years I researched it and I would like want it and put it on a shelf. And then it would come back around and I'd look at it again and I'd put it on a shelf. And then I just started to pray about it. I was like, man, that's a big ticket item. But I tell you, after my dad passed away, he passed during COVID. And because he was in Canada and because they tried to keep me out of my homeland and they didn't allow me to be with him on his deathbed, it was a very traumatic experience for me. And so already dealing with Lyme disease and trying to cope and keep up with life and teenage boys at that time, it was about all I could take. And so I thought, well, do I go to a grief therapist because they're going to tell me what I already know? I've already bought all the books, but nothing would stick. Remember I told you earlier, Ev, that your mind and your brain are not the same?
Yes, yes.
So we took money out of savings and we bought a system, and I trained and I trained and I trained and I trained. I got it like the end of June. By September, I was doing crazy stuff that was absolutely unheard of for me, because I was the person that had to have her groceries delivered because I couldn't handle the lights, the sounds, the smells. I couldn't stand up hardly in the grocery store, to hopping on, I wanted to go see my mom. I'd already lost my dad. And I thought, I'm going to fly into Great Falls, Montana. And hopefully when I get to the border, they'll let me in. I have to have everything regimented, planned. I am like the quintessential spoon theory person. If anybody listening in has lupus or any of those type of, or MS or those types of conditions, you're familiar with the spoon theory. I'm the poster child of the spoon theory. And so I had to calculate everything. And for me to go and do something that was just so crazy like that with no guarantee, and I didn't want to fly, was amazing to me, because I had trained and I was doing stuff that was like, ooh, this is adventurous and I'm okay. I'm not even stressed. Whatever happens, happens. I'm in the moment. I'll be okay. I didn't know who this person was. And then I also didn't know who I was when I was driving down. Well, so I live in Central Florida, and during snowbird season, traffic gets kind of crazy. And I had this lady in a big old Lincoln pull up in front of me, and I'm in a Jeep and I had to hit the ditch. And so I was like Mario Andretti. I hit the ditch and I got up and around her, and I looked back, and sure enough, she couldn't see over the steering wheel. And I just kept on driving. Do you know, Ev, if that would have happened to me prior to all my NeuroOptimal sessions, I would have had to go home and take a propranolol, a Xanax, and I would have been in a flare-up for 2 weeks. Because when your body is overstressed like that and it's already tapped out, it's all connected. It's all psychosomatic. We're body, mind, and spirit. We're all together, right? And so I knew something was different. I was finally handled the grizzly bear by avoiding the car accident. And then once the threat was over, 90 seconds later, my heart rate turned back to normal. And I went on, and I went, wow, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's normal. And so you said in my bio, I think it's kind of funny, why I figure if I live in Florida and I'm an adventurous person, and my health and my personality used to be at a tug of war because I love to do outdoorsy things. I was an athlete. I love adventure, but I was sick all the time. And with that causes anxiety and depression, and you feel like you're good for nothing, and life's passing you by, and you live in a constant state of FOMO. I was all of those things. But for somebody who spent 2 decades on the couch to last fall going alligator hunting at night, I knew my nervous system and my brain were healed, because that would scare any big buff Marine on a good day.
Yep. It's like the most Florida thing ever. It's awesome.
And it is the most Florida thing ever. And it was awesome. And I shot a 10-foot gator,
Nice.
and Mama's getting some boots and a wallet. And my son, who goes to the University of Florida, I actually bronzed the gator head. So when he graduates, that's his gift. But
Nice.
it's been such a experience for me that I realized I was too sick to go anywhere to have the machine work on me. And so once I noticed the transformation with me, I thought, I just need to make this available to other people. So I got my certification done. I bought more machines, and I studied the technology. I joined, it's a global community. We're in 76 countries. And the mission behind the software of NeuroOptimal, it's a company called Zengar, as in Zen, is to relieve suffering, period. That's it. It's just to relieve suffering. And I was suffering. And I am finally on the other side of that, where I am literally helping people out of the valley of shadow of death that I was in, by helping to relieve suffering and getting people strong and resilient and good at stress. And I see it now as a trainer every day I'm in my clinic. I see people with all types of conditions. And for FDA compliance, I can't say that it cures, treats any disease, but it trains the brain so that the brain can self-optimize. And there's no end to it. Like, I have my own system. I sell them now. I'm a representative for the company. I certify people. I am 100% now a NeuroOptimal poster child, no longer the spoon theory poster child, because I'm regulated, I'm healed. And I didn't think I would ever be this person, because I cried out to God for years. One, to just keep my head above water, but two, just to be able to function. And now I'm not only just dealing with doing better where I can handle the grocery store, now I'm slaying gators. So to me, that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I just wanted to go to one comment we had a little bit earlier. The username is just functionally enlightened. I don't have anything else. They said, I too struggled with DNRS and had to start with Gupta program. Brain Tap has also been a game changer for them. Really cool. I have Brain Tap in my, my fiance and I have an in-person studio, and we do have that there. But I'm very interested in this for a variety of reasons. Not all of which we'll have the time to do, but I want to talk from the consumer perspective. So one, you're in Central Florida, so I'm assuming the clinic's in Central Florida, correct?
Yeah, my clinic is in Central Florida, and I do offer in-person sessions, but I send rentals all over. In fact, I've got one of them in Mexico right now. And I've sold to people anywhere in the world. We're in 76 countries, and there's a lot of, it's been around for 20 years, but we are just on the cusp of neuroscience making an explosion, because 5 years ago, unless you were a neuropsychiatrist, you didn't know the term neuroplasticity.
Sure.
Right? And so we're, again, 20 years ago, I wish I'd started with brain health, but I think we're starting to realize the power of the mind and the importance of getting the brain and the nervous system regulated so that it's firing on all cylinders. And so I service people locally. I can rent machines, and I can set you up with a machine in your home. And I don't know all of your listening audience, but here's what I do know. About 70% of the people that buy systems are moms that are getting it for their families, because they've got a kid who's struggling with anxiety, depression. They might be ASD, they might be ADD, ADHD, depressed or struggling socially. So many kids, with COVID and I have a new book out right now that's like dealing with social media addiction and working with parents that are struggling with those issues, is because it alters our brain chemistry. It puts us into like a quiet mode. And again, if you don't use your brain, you're going to lose it. And so a lot of kids are struggling like never before. And this brain training system is plug and play. And I mean, I'm happy to get on a Zoom call, but there's information out there. You can be like me, buy a system, cold turkey, get hooked up, train, and just watch your life transform. It has transformed my health, like emotionally, mentally, even relationally. I have like I stay in my lane now. Like it's nothing for me to lay a boundary down and realize that's not my circus, that's not my monkeys.
Yeah.
It's because everything makes sense now. Whereas all of the cognitive therapy that I was doing before, all the books that I read, all the supplements that I've taken, nothing was sticking, but it was because my brain just wasn't working. So if you can get your brain right, all those other things are going to fall into play. And so beauty is it's plug and play. It is a high ticket item, but there's options. There's lease programs, there's rentals. Come to Central Florida, I'll hook you up.
I
But
was about to say,
I'm
yeah,
happy to talk to anybody about it.
we do have a lot of FDNs in Central Florida. And again, not that you can't rent it anyway, but that's really cool to hear.
Mm-hmm.
We got about 5 minutes left. It's totally cool if we go a couple minutes over.
Yeah.
Because one thing I wanted to ask is, it was just very interesting to hear you talk about the experience with the Jeep and the Lincoln, because I found similar experiences at catching myself in them, and I'm curious, anyone's who is watching, let us know in the comments if you relate to this at all, because I have found as I've got healthier, there are these circumstances. For example, I had panic disorder, like diagnosed at one point in my life. It's not that I can't get anxious. Anxiety is a normal human feeling, but I can't even imagine. It's almost like I'm incapable of getting to a panic attack now, no matter what happens. The flights have been turbulent. There's been crazy stuff going on, and I would rather be on the ground, but it's like I'm incapable of getting to the panic level. And so I don't know how much of this came from the general healing that I did. I'm sure some of that's been useful. I think also some of it, and I don't necessarily recommend this, I got very into like motivational speakers and stuff at 18. A lot of it was just like willpowering my way through, like, okay, I'm freaking out nervous and we're just going to do it anyway. And yeah, your brain can retrain probably with that, but it is a bit exhausting. What I love about something like this is it seems like, because I don't fully understand, you said plug and play. So what is someone actually doing though, while they're going through this program? Because this sounds like very non-invasive, very chill, and you don't have to will your way through crazy stuff to be able to do this.
Yes, that's the absolute best part. It's like going to the gym and the spa at the same time is what I say, because you're training your brain, but all you're doing is listening to music. Everybody, we have a Grammy award-winning composer that made the soundtrack. It runs 33 minutes. You simply put 5 sensors on your head. I know there's other systems where you got all kinds of contraptions. You've got 2 little sensors that go here. I should have hooked myself up for talking to you. Maybe you can do it next time. And you have a couple ear clips, and then you have a grounding clip on your ear, and it's reading the cortical activity of your entire brain. And what it does is it's detecting changes. It's like a mirror inside your head that's saying, here's what your brain is doing. What do you want to do about it? And so the brain can change. So I always give this analogy. This is really helpful. I live by I-95, the interstate. And so if you're driving down the interstate and you veer off the road a little bit, what happens? You get those little rumble strips. What does that do? It gets your attention and it goes, oh, pay attention. That's what this does. So the neurofeedback program has wonderful music, but you will hear little clicks, pauses, and interrupts. And what that does is it brings you back to the present moment in your cognitive sense, but on the backside of it is training your brain to recalibrate so that it's interrupting those consistent cortical patterns that don't serve us. Okay. So imagine how much energy that frees up for healing in all areas of your life when you're calm and you're regulated and you've got the pruned neural pathways that don't serve us to no longer be there. So it makes you flexible and resilient. So if anybody asks me, what does NeuroOptimal do? It makes you flexible and resilient to stress. That's what it does. And it keeps you living more like in the present moment. And the more you train, the more you realize that that is what it's like. But it's simple. You put some conductive paste on the sensors, you put it on, you double click it to start. It runs 33 minutes and then it clicks off. You take the sensors off and you go on about your day. When I travel, or if there's been something going on that is extra stressful, sometimes I go for weeks now without a session, but I do a tune-up, and I always know, you know what, I'm getting a little scatterbrained. I got XYZ to do. It brings me back. It hones me back in. It's like dialing back in. And, but on those times that I travel or I'm just a little out of pocket, sometimes I run 2 sessions in a day, and it resets me every time. So it's beautiful. A lot of parents buy it for their kids, and the whole family can train. And it's something that once you have it as a wellness tool for the rest of your life, and you can train your whole neighborhood. My sole mission would be to as many people to be brain training with NeuroOptimal. I could solve world peace. I swear.
Oh man, this might be warranting of a part 2, but I'll leave it at this for now. I'm very interested in this, especially for my clients that come in person, because I can see them being able.
Yep.
I'll explain this to you off air, but my biggest point is I could see me renting this, and then I can do a report on the podcast. I can do a solo thing, or we can have you back on, and I can talk about what happened with me. So since we are at our time, Marley, where can people find you? And then I have one more question for you after that.
Yeah, for sure. You can find me at marley.jones@neurooptimal.com or harmonyneurofeedback@gmail.com. I do want to mention that it pairs extremely well with functional practitioners. You can build a business running your own systems. I have chiropractors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, a lot of cognitive therapists, psychologists, functional med doctors. They're doing it. But guess what? One of my favorite colleagues was an art teacher. She had an ACE score, an adverse childhood experience score of 10 out of 10 because of her trauma history. And she was an art teacher, but it changed her life. And she sells systems like crazy. Nice. Because people know what she was like before. And so it's for everybody. And so people are like, well, who should use NeuroOptimal? I'm like, you got a brain? You can train. And yes, you should.
I love it. Marley, our signature question on the show to finish up today, and this can be about brain health, but it can be about anything health-wise. Obviously, you're well-versed in a variety of topics. So the signature question is, if we could give you a magic wand and you could wave it and you could force all of our listeners to do one thing for our health, whether that's, start doing one thing or stop doing one thing, what's the one thing that Marley Jones gets us to do?
You know what? I would say don't fear things that are stressful and build stress resilience. The easiest way that I have found is with brain training with NeuroOptimal. But because if you fear stress and the only way you're ever going to avoid stress is when you're 6 feet under. We live in this world. We can't be in a bubble. But put your oxygen mask on, train yourself, train the people in your family, let it transform you, and then offer it to other people, because we want people to be relieved of their suffering, and that's our goal.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm looking forward to future conversations that I can very strongly sense.